For 63 days, a city fought back with nothing but stolen rifles and unstoppable courage. In August 1944, as Soviet tanks waited just miles away, the people of Warsaw rose up alone against the full might of the German war machine. They had no air force, no artillery, no allies close enough to help. What happened next would leave 200,000 dead and a capital city erased from the map. This is the story Stalin didn't want the world to remember. By the summer of 1944, Poland had endured nearly 5 years of brutal German occupation. The Home Army, Poland's underground resistance, had been preparing in secret for this moment since the very first days of the war. Tens of thousands of fighters, many still teenagers, waited for the signal to rise. Their goal was audacious: liberate their own capital before the Soviets arrived, and reclaim Poland's independence before Stalin could claim it for himself. On August 1st, 1944, at exactly 5 p.m., the order came. It was called W Hour. Across Warsaw, church bells rang out as a signal, and ordinary citizens transformed into soldiers overnight. Bakers, students, and office workers picked up whatever weapons they could find. Many units had only one rifle for every 4 fighters. Despite the odds, within hours the insurgents had seized large parts of the city center from their German occupiers. The Home Army's arsenal was almost laughably small for the scale of their ambition. Roughly 2,500 rifles, a few hundred submachine guns, and barely any anti-tank weapons stood against German tanks, artillery, and dive bombers. Fighters improvised explosives from whatever materials they could scavenge. Some carried nothing but grenades made in secret workshops. Yet this desperate courage caught the German garrison completely off guard in the uprising's opening hours. Medical care during the uprising was almost non-existent. Field hospitals were set up in basements, cellars, and bombed-out apartment buildings, staffed by volunteer nurses and doctors with dwindling supplies. Wounded fighters often waited hours for treatment, and anesthesia ran out within the first weeks. Despite these horrific conditions, many severely injured insurgents insisted on returning to the front lines as soon as they could stand. As German reinforcements poured into the city, the fighting shifted into brutal house-to-house combat. Soldiers moved through shattered buildings, sometimes just meters from insurgent positions. Every street corner, staircase, and rooftop became a potential battlefield. The Home Army used the city's ruins as their greatest weapon, moving through basements and sewers to strike and vanish before the Germans could respond. Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler responded to the uprising with unimaginable cruelty. He ordered that Warsaw be razed to the ground and its population annihilated, regardless of the human cost. SS and police units under commanders Heinz Reinfarth and Oskar Dirlewanger carried out mass executions of civilians in the Wola district alone, killing tens of thousands of men, women, and children who had no connection to the fighting whatsoever. As the battle intensified, civilians found themselves trapped between 2 armies with nowhere safe to go. Families fled through burning streets carrying only what they could grab in seconds. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, their residents wandering through rubble with bundles of belongings on their backs. For many, the greatest danger wasn't the German army, but simply finding food, water, and shelter each day. Despite the horror surrounding them, the insurgents built something remarkable: a functioning underground society. Secret newspapers were printed daily to boost morale and share news. Postal services delivered mail between districts, using teenage couriers who risked their lives in the open streets. Field kitchens fed both fighters and civilians. In the middle of a war zone, Warsaw's people refused to stop living. Moments of unexpected joy broke through the devastation. Crowds gathered around any signs of hope, cheering fighters who returned from successful raids, celebrating small victories against impossible odds. Children ran messages between barricades. Neighbors who had never spoken before shared their last rations. This fierce human solidarity became almost as powerful as any weapon the insurgents possessed. Warsaw's train stations and major buildings became key strategic targets throughout the uprising. Control over these locations meant control over supply routes and troop movements across the city. German forces fortified these positions heavily, turning grand pre-war architecture into makeshift fortresses. Some of the fiercest fighting of the entire uprising took place around these critical transportation hubs. Feeding a city under siege required extraordinary improvisation. Civilians used whatever vehicles remained functional to transport food, ammunition, and the wounded between districts. Makeshift armored trucks, cobbled together from scrap metal and captured equipment, ferried supplies through streets under constant sniper fire. Every successful supply run was a small miracle in a city being systematically destroyed. By late August, German forces had brought overwhelming firepower to bear against the insurgents. Heavy machine guns, flame-throwing tanks, and specialized demolition units called Goliaths, remote-controlled miniature tanks packed with explosives, were deployed to destroy barricades and buildings block by block. The insurgents, still armed mostly with rifles, fought on regardless of the impossible mismatch in firepower. As September arrived, entire districts of Warsaw had been reduced to skeletal ruins. Soldiers marched past buildings that were nothing more than blackened shells, their windows staring out like empty eye sockets. The old town, once the historic heart of the city, had been almost completely leveled. What had taken centuries to build was being erased in a matter of weeks. Fire became one of the uprising's defining horrors. German forces deliberately torched entire city blocks, sometimes to flush out insurgents, sometimes simply as an act of collective punishment. Flames consumed riverside warehouses and residential buildings alike, sending thick black smoke rising over the Vistula River. Firefighting was nearly impossible under constant bombardments, so fires often burned for days uncontrolled. The destruction of Warsaw wasn't incidental to the fighting, it was deliberate policy. Special German demolition squads moved systematically through captured districts, planting explosives in buildings that had survived the initial combat. Churches, libraries, and government buildings were targeted specifically because of their historical and cultural significance. This was an attempt to erase Polish identity itself. Outside help never truly arrived. Though Western aircraft attempted airdrops of weapons and supplies, Stalin refused for weeks to let Soviet-controlled airfields be used for refueling, crippling the effort. Many supply canisters fell directly into German hands or drifted uselessly beyond insurgent lines. The Home Army fought on increasingly alone, watching Soviet forces remain stationary just across the river. By late September, the insurgents were running critically low on ammunition, food, and fighters. Entire units had been wiped out or forced to surrender in isolated pockets throughout the city. German forces advanced steadily, retaking district after district that had once flown the Polish flag. The dream of liberating Warsaw before Soviet troops arrived was slipping irreversibly away. On October 2, 1944, General Komorowski signed the capitulation, ending 63 days of fighting. Roughly 15,000 Home Army fighters and up to 200,000 civilians had died. The survivors were expelled entirely from the city, sent to POW camps, concentration camps, or forced labor across Germany. The shoes and belongings left behind by the deported tell a silent story of a population erased overnight. After the surrender, Hitler ordered the complete destruction of whatever remained of Warsaw. Demolition squads spent months systematically dynamiting building after building, church after church, until nearly 85% of the city lay in rubble. When Soviet troops finally crossed the river in January 1945, they found not a capital city, but an empty wasteland of ash and broken stone, a warning of what defiance could cost.